A bobcat, no one knew where it came from, was found at the base of a cliff, its body broken, breathing faintly in the cold and silence. The rescue team discovered it when they thought they were looking at a lifeless body. But in those half-closed eyes, there flickered a final spark of life. They brought it to the rescue center, unsure if it would survive the first night. Yet the 92-day journey that followed was more than just a process of healing wounds. It was the quiet resurrection of a soul that had fallen into the deepest pit of despair. It could never return to the wild, but it lived. Day by day, little by little, it learned again how to breathe, how to stand, and how to trust. And in its own way, it reminded the humans who had saved it of one simple truth. Not every creature gets to go back to the wild, but every life deserves a chance to move forward if it still wants to live. It didn't cry out, didn't thrash, didn't growl like other wounded animals often do. When the bobcat was found, it simply lay there, cold, stiff, and eerily silent. Even the wind sweeping across the cliff it had fallen from couldn't drown out the faint whisper of its breath. The first rescue worker thought it was already dead. But when he leaned in close, he heard it a raspy wheeze, like life itself was caught in its throat, refusing to let go. Its neck was twisted, one leg bent unnaturally. Its back is bruised dark, eyes tightly shut, ears unresponsive, even to footsteps nearby. They wrapped it in a thick undershirt and rushed it to the nearest wildlife station, where a vet and a heated oxygen chamber were waiting. That first night, they had one goal: keep it warm. They pressed warm towels to its body, turned on heat lamps, started fluid drips. No one dared to speak of the next day. By morning, a young caretaker tried to feed it a mixture of warm broth and mashed meat. At first, only the weakest flick of its tongue. Then, it was swallowed. Once, then twice. No one said anything, but in their eyes, something stirred. Something that looked a lot like hope. They gave it a temporary name: Echo. A voice returning from the depths, as if its soul was trying to claw its way back into this world. That afternoon, Echo opened its eyes for the first time, pale gold, dry, clouded, staring straight at the ceiling. No one knew what it saw or remembered, but at that moment, no one called it a critical case anymore. It was still there. It hadn't given up. And though the world had collapsed beneath its feet, Echo hadn't chosen to let go. It wanted to live, and that was enough to begin. Echo did not cry, did not growl, and never tried to run. It simply lay still day after day amid unfamiliar hands working gently, trying to pull it back from the edge of life. On the third day, the team discovered parasites in its intestines. The medication was crushed into powder, carefully mixed into small pieces of ground meat. Echo ate slowly, but never refused. It didn't spit the food out. It didn't swipe or scratch when cleaned. No one knew where it had come. From high mountains, dense forest, or somewhere in between. No one could say if it once had a mother, or a pack, or if it was just a wanderer who never got a chance to grow up. But one thing was clear: it lacked the natural instincts of a wild bobcat. It didn't react to loud noises. It didn't flinch from the light. It didn't shy from human hands. And somehow, that made everyone ache a little more inside. They began caring for Echo like a motherless newborn. In the mornings, they laid it on a soft mat and gently stretched its legs and spine. In the afternoons, they massaged its joints, part therapy, part warmth, and part an attempt to remind its body how to feel. One young caretaker brought Echo a small ball of yarn. Echo didn't play, but sometimes someone would see a paw softly brush the ball. A faint, dreamlike gesture, somewhere between instinct and longing for something it no longer remembered. At night, Echo rarely slept soundly. It curled tightly into itself, ears alert even as its eyes stayed shut. Once, a caretaker swore they heard a low, quiet growl, not threatening, not angry, but more like a call to someone who would never answer again. In the wild, no pack means no survival. But now, Echo had only humans. And strangely, instead of resisting, it accepted. Not with submission, but with the silence of a soul trying to begin again with a pack that didn't speak its language. By the third week, Echo began to walk a few steps. They were slow and shaky, but unmistakably intentional. Its appetite returned. Its eyes stayed open longer. And once, it even let out a faint growl when someone got too close to its food bowl. It was during this seemingly hopeful phase that the veterinary team had to make a painful, honest assessment. Echo would never go back to the wild. Not just because of lingering injuries, but because its survival instincts, the most vital tools of any wild bobcat, had dulled. From the moment of rescue, Echo had been immersed in human presence. It had grown used to the sound of doors creaking, spoons tapping bowls. It knew the scent of antiseptics more than earth, the feel of blankets more than underbrush. It had been tended to, not taught to stalk, pounce, or hide. A wild bobcat would bolt at the sound of footsteps. Echo simply turned its head and watched. It wasn't afraid, and that, they all knew, was the most dangerous thing of all. One caretaker whispered to herself, "If we let it go, would it even make it through one winter?" No one answered. From then on, the language changed. Rehabilitation became long-term care. A larger enclosure was prepared, one that mimicked the outdoors, a few tree trunks, scattered rocks, hidden corners. But it was still a boundary. Still walls real and invisible between Echo and the world it should have belonged to. It didn't understand the word future, but somehow it sensed a shift. Echo grew quieter. It no longer called out at night. It didn't react when people entered. And then, as if accepting a fate none of them had wanted for it, Echo curled up in a corner of its new cage, eyes open, gazing out through the steel mesh toward the sky. The same sky it would no longer run beneath. On day 32, Echo jumped for the first time. It wasn't high, and it wasn't far. Just a clumsy leap from one rock to a nearby wooden plank. But everyone who witnessed it froze for a moment, then quietly smiled. From that day on, Echo moved more not to flee, but to explore. It tiptoed around the edges of the enclosure, followed the scent of meat with careful steps, and hid behind barriers at the sound of something unfamiliar. It was no longer the frail creature curled up on a heating mat. Though its body still lacked full balance, its gait was steadier now, and its tail began to sway naturally when turning corners. And its eyes, perhaps the clearest change now, gleamed with alertness, mixed with a spark of curiosity. The staff introduced simple toys into its space: a small leather ball, boiled beef bones, a rope adorned with tufts of fur. Echo didn't play like a house cat. It tested, clawed, tugged, then paused to observe. Every action was a quiet assessment of instinct, no longer shaped for the wild, but for a new kind of life. One lived within boundaries. When feeding, it became more independent, no longer waiting to be hand-fed or looking for permission. It growled softly when someone approached, gripping its food bowl with both paws, as if it were guarding a treasure. One veterinarian joked, "It's acting more and more like a 3-year-old knows how to sulk, to hide things, and to claim what's his." And it was true. Echo was growing up, in its own way, within a world without a mother, without a pack, only humans, toys, and short little jumps in a space large enough not to feel like a cage, but never quite free enough to replace the wild. A month and a half after being rescued, Echo began to change. During the day, it would sprawl lazily in a sunlit corner, hind legs stretched out, eyes half closed, uninterested in anything around. But at night, when the lights dimmed and the rescue center fell into silence, Echo became something else. Swift, sharp, unpredictable. The first thing to become its prey was the surveillance camera. Echo stared at the faint red light, as if it held a secret meant to be hidden. Then, with sudden precision, it leapt, slashing, clawing. The footage flickered. Sometimes it blacked out completely. Echo wasn't being destructive. It was testing boundaries. Between freedom and observation. Between being a rescued animal and a watched creature. It was no longer tame. No more nuzzling into human hands. no more responding to calls. But it wasn't hostile either. When someone entered the enclosure, it retreated not in fear, but in a conscious choice to maintain distance, to see, to understand, to decide how to react. It began to make demands, growling softly when meals were late, tearing up straw bedding when dissatisfied. Once, it dragged a bone into the far corner and lay curled in front of it, guarding it like something sacred. Some staff called it half wild, half familiar, a being suspended between two worlds, no longer fully belonging to either. Echo didn't return to the wild, but it never became domesticated. It didn't recover to who it once was. It survived in a new way, a way no one could teach, no book could outline. Only instinct and quiet willpower carved the path. And in that independence, in a space with no forest, no home, Echo, finally, became itself. Though Echo had lived in captivity for nearly 2 months, it had never truly slept during the day. But lately, the staff began to notice small signs: twitching ears, softly curling paws, a slow flick of the tail as it slept, as if wandering through dreams only it could understand. Some nights, the camera caught Echo curled tightly, letting out a faint whimper before suddenly waking up. Its golden eyes snapped open, gaze unfocused for a few moments, as though it had just returned from someplace far away, a place with no people, no artificial lights, only wind, trees, and the hush of dry leaves. No one knew what it dreamed about, but each morning, subtle changes would appear in its enclosure. A toy tucked deep under the straw, a bone dragged into a darker corner. Once, it had even moved the entire sleeping mat to a new spot lying there, as if it had just completed building a nest. No one taught it to do this. There were no lessons, no mother, no pack. Yet these instincts surfaced quietly, steadily, as if something wild inside had simply refused to vanish. One young rescuer, watching the screen, whispered, "It's dreaming," in the language of the wild. And it was. These dreams didn't need words. They revealed themselves in the way Echo stretched, the way it softly shifted its body, or in the rhythm of its breath, like a quiet echo of something ancient that had survived inside. Echo was no longer a bobcat that had merely survived. It was a being fully alive, not entirely part of the forest, not fully part of humankind. But through each breath, each slumber, and each small instinctive act, it reminded everyone, some things in nature aren't meant to be tamed. They only ask to be left undisturbed, to dream, to breathe, and to continue being. Echo grew quickly, like wind brushing past the trees. Its gray fur deepened in tone, muscles firm beneath the skin, and its walk grew steady, no longer trembling but confident and deliberate. It no longer needed help. It no longer flinched when touched. It knew when feeding time came. It gave a soft, polite sound when hungry. It waited quietly by the door whenever someone approached with a tray. It learned to play alone, batting balls, tugging ropes, stalking bones as if they were prey. It also knew when to rest, curling in patches of sunlight or slipping quietly into shadows when it didn't want company. But among all the things people noticed, it was Echo's eyes that left them silent. Gone was the wide-eyed fear of the early days. And yet it didn't carry the fierce, sharp stare typical of wild bobcats either. Echo's gaze had quieted like it understood something, and no longer needed to ask why. It had grown up under electric lights, behind safety walls, in the hands of humans. There was no mother to teach it how to hunt, no siblings to tussle and learn boundaries with. Every behavior, every habit had been quietly observed, recorded, and gently guided by the people around it. Its childhood had been shattered by that fateful fall. But at the same time, it had been pieced back together through medicine, warm hands, and soft voices calling its name each morning. To other bobcats in the wilderness, perhaps Echo was no longer one of them. But to those who had saved it, raised it, watched every small change, Echo remained something precious. A spirit once broken, now mended by a kind of love that asked for nothing in return. It didn't need to be like the others. It only needed to live and be loved exactly as it was. On day 92, Echo stood as if it had never been broken. No more tired tilt of the head. No more hesitant steps. It ran, leapt, chased its ball, and sprawled in the morning sun with quiet confidence. At times, it tiptoed up to the window ledge, eyes gazing outward as if asking, "Does that world still call for me?" But no answer came. And perhaps it no longer needed one. Echo didn't return to the forest, didn't reclaim a predator's life, or disappear into the stillness of the wild. It stayed, with a name, not a number, not the injured animal. A real name written by hand on its medical card, spoken each day in warm voices. Once shattered, once silent, once lying on the edge of death, it had become a living symbol of survival, not perfect, but whole, in its own way. And that was enough.